Hi everyone, my name is Nicholas and this is the very first ever 180 Degrees Consulting Leadership Hangout. What we're trying to do is get people on air to talk about leadership, to inspire leaders in NGOs, social businesses and businesses alike to question what they thought leadership was and get them to become better leaders. And this is 180 Degrees Consulting, and today, to kick it off, we've decided to invite our very own CEO to talk about leadership, who's been a leader of the organization for many, many years and brought it from a little organization in Sydney to being a huge organization worldwide. So I'm very happy to welcome Nat Ware, our CEO, and I would actually quickly kick off by asking you, what is 180 Degrees Consulting exactly?
Sure. A question that I should know the answer to. So, for those of you who aren't aware, 180 Degrees is now the world's largest university-based consultancy. What we try to do within 180 Degrees is improve the effectiveness of non-profits and social enterprises around the world. And the way that we try to do that is by utilizing the abilities of university students around the world. And so what we do is that we connect the most talented university students all around the world, in Europe, in North America, and in Australia, and other countries around Asia. And what we do is we connect those students with different socially conscious organizations such that students get work experience, the opportunity to make a difference, and at the same time organizations get help overcoming whatever challenges they're facing, whether it be trying to measure their social impact, or figuring out what programs they should focus on, or working out where to expand into new countries. And so we do try to create that mutually beneficial arrangement between non-profits and university students. And so that's essentially what I like about the organization, and that's 180 Degrees in a nutshell.
Okay, so you've taken, since 2007, you've taken the organization from being in one place to now being all over the world. Where is 180 Degrees going right now?
Yeah, so at the moment we've got 43 branches around the world, and so it's grown quite rapidly, but I still see this as very much the beginning of 180 Degrees. In the next year we'll work with about 400 or 500 different organizations around the world, again helping all those organizations to overcome challenges they're facing, from Nike Foundation to World Vision to small non-profits as well. But whilst we're helping 400 or 500 organizations in the next year, there are thousands, probably tens of thousands of organizations that still don't have access to affordable, high-quality consulting services. And so I'm committed, and I know you're committed, and I know many other people in 180 Degrees are committed to try to increase our social impact. And so I do see 180 Degrees growing quite rapidly over the next year or two, maybe from 50 branches to around 200 branches in the next 2 years. And hopefully that will enable us to achieve an even greater social impact than we're currently achieving. And I do want 180 Degrees to be the organization that has the greatest social impact of any student organization and also of any consultancy worldwide. I think we're on the right trajectory. I think we're moving in that direction, and I'm excited to see what we can do over the next year or two.
Okay, really cool. Now let's get a little bit more into the topic of leadership, because that's what we really want to talk about. Can you personally say what leadership is to you?
I think it's a hard question. Leadership is one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot, and I think often people use it in the wrong way. And I don't pretend to be an expert in leadership. I think one key thing about leadership is you've got to recognize what you don't know, and you've got to constantly be learning and working out how you can be a better leader. So I don't pretend to know everything, but I think a few lessons that I've learned over the past few years. One is that leadership is very much about facilitation. It's not about you. It's very much about trying to bring out the best in other people, working out what strengths they have, working out what motivates them. Because as one person or as one individual, there's only so much you can achieve. You really need to sort of facilitate and empower others to get behind whatever cause it is that you're working towards. So that's one thing I've learned. I think a second thing that I've learned about leadership is that it's important to be a person who keeps pushing things forward. One thing about entrepreneurship in general is that there are far more lows or sort of letdowns than there are highs or ups. And I think that it's important for a leader to be almost a calming influence, to be the person who takes things in their stride, who doesn't sort of worry too much when you do encounter those obstacles, but sort of encourages people that you'll be able to get through it. It's not the end of the world. You'll be stronger in the end. And I think the other way that you keep moving forwards is that you sort of stay focused on where you want to end up. You stay focused on the destination, and I think all leaders need a quiet confidence that you will be able to get to wherever it is that you want to get to. But at the same time, I think leaders need a certain sort of humility or an awareness or an appreciation that you don't always know exactly the path to get there. There's a saying, the one thing you know about a business plan is that it's not right, or it's not true, or it's not going to work out exactly how you plan. And I think that's true for a lot of organizations. There will be things that you encounter that you're not expecting, and I think leaders need to be able to have the confidence that you'll get there, that you'll be able to achieve what you want, but also the humility that you don't have all the answers, right? And that you don't need all the answers. I think trust is more about being wrong in the right way than about always being right. So there are a few lessons that I've learned at least.
Okay, cool. So can you talk a little bit, I mean, it's 7 years you've been basically the head of the organization, CEO, I guess, only later. Can you speak about any of the obstacles? You said confidence was an important thing, but can you be more specific about were there obstacles? What kind of obstacles, and how did you get around them?
Sure. I mean, one obvious obstacle is when I was starting the organization, and I'm sure a lot of the people who start 180 degrees branches around the world encounter similar problems, that often what we get told is students can't consult. That's certainly what I was told at the beginning. People would say this isn't going to work, students don't have the skills, students don't have the expertise to be able to help out organizations. And so that was what I got told 5 or 10 times before I even started doing consulting, before we even trialed it. And what I've been pleasantly surprised by over the past 6 or 7 years is that assumption that a lot of people have has well and truly been proven false. About 97% of organizations we work with say they'd want to work with us again, say they'd recommend us to other organizations. And I'm constantly getting emails from nonprofits and social enterprises saying how surprised they are and how encouraged they are by the great work that our consultants do around the world. And so I think that was one obstacle, just being told that it wouldn't work, that it's not a good idea, that you're not going to succeed. And I think leaders need to sort of, when people are critical of what you're doing, and that will happen regardless of what you're working on, I think leaders need to sort of challenge that assumption, challenge that criticism, and almost use that as sort of extra motivation to do what you need to do.
Okay, perfect. So one thing I really wanted to ask you about, Nat has given a TED Talk a few years ago, I think.
I think it was about this time last year. Yeah.
Okay, so 1 year ago. And especially now because the big movement of the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. And then suddenly a huge movement of saying, for example, the charity is spending too much money on admin. So basically exactly what you were talking about in your TED Talk. And you said that charities should be measured more or less by the standards of efficiency, method, and outcome, not by what they spend their money on. Should a leader in an NGO essentially be acting like a leader, let's say, in an investment bank or a top-tier consultancy or a hedge fund?
I think it's a good question, and on the Ice Bucket Challenge, I'm not going to go into all the details, but I do think often when we talk about charities and non-profit organizations, we focus too much on the inputs to the organization. How is the organization spending its money? What percentage is used for fundraising versus admin versus programs? But if you recognize that different non-profits differ vastly in their effectiveness, some are 100 times, some are 1,000 times more effective, then what that means is that it's far less significant whether an organization spends 70% on programs or 80% on programs. What matters far more is whether those programs are effective, whether they're doing what they set out to achieve, and whether those programs can be made more effective. Because if one organization is spending 70% on programs but is 100 times more effective than one spending 90% on programs, then surely you prefer the former to the latter. So that's one observation. In relation to should non-profit leaders act like the leaders of for-profit companies, I think it's different, but there are certainly elements of leadership in the for-profit world that I think are applicable in the non-profit sector as well. In many ways, non-profit leadership is far more difficult than leadership in the for-profit sector. One, you're often dealing with volunteers. Often these volunteers are working on a part-time basis, which makes it harder to stay on top of things, bring people up to speed, work as a cohesive unit. I also think that non-profits often rely on intrinsic motivation rather than extrinsic motivation of salary and bonuses and so on, which presents its own challenges. But I do think there are lessons that we can learn from the for-profit sector. I think it's important that leaders are quite objective, leaders are quite data-driven. There's a saying that I like, it's that too many people use data like a drunk person uses a lamppost for support, not illumination. And I think that's particularly true in the non-profit sector. Often leaders are sometimes reluctant to open themselves to criticism. They're often reluctant to sort of look at the data, see what's working and what's not, because people might be scared of what they'll find out. They might find out that, hey, not all my programs are as effective as I think. But we do need to be quite open to criticism. We need to be transparent. We need to almost sort of assume that we're wrong in some way and then try to figure out where it is that we're wrong. No one's going to be right 100% of the time, but we do need to be quite objective, quite data-driven in the way that we sort of manage our programs and the way in which we lead.
Okay, all right. Then actually I think we'll get to the last question because you don't want to make this too long. You've seen probably hundreds of projects happen. You've probably met enough, more leaders of NGOs that most of us will ever meet, and talk to them and see what obstacles they overcome. Is there anything you could say that leaders in NGOs specifically could do today to be better leaders altogether?
I think one thing that I often find is there is a perception that the way you're a leader is that you insist you're always right and that you sort of push in that direction and that people will say that you're wrong and you keep pushing. And I think that the real challenge for leaders is to hold together two sort of things that almost seem in conflict with each other. One of them is pushing forward when there's criticism and ignoring that criticism and proving your critics wrong. And on the other hand, recognizing that you don't have all the answers, that you will be wrong from time to time, that you need to be flexible, that you need to adapt, that you need to carve out new paths. And I think the leaders that can hold together those two things are the most effective leaders. And I think the way that you do that, as I maybe mentioned before, is that you are confident and that you insist you're right in terms of the fact that you'll reach your destination. You insist that you'll ultimately achieve what you want to achieve. But at the same time, you insist that you're wrong in terms of how to get there. You'll be right in a number of ways, but there will be areas in which you're wrong. And I think the best leaders are those that almost challenge their team, that challenge their employees. This is wrong in some way. Our plan is wrong. Let's try to figure out what about it might be wrong. Let's try to figure out how it can be improved. And if you go in with the assumption that whatever program it is that we're running, there's always room for improvement, then that actually fosters dialogue, it fosters discussion around how it can be improved. And I think that is far more productive towards organizational growth and towards achieving social outcomes, rather than just constantly saying we're right no matter what. And so I think that's one lesson that other people might be able to take on board.
Wow, okay, so that's very useful to know. Now, we are not here by ourselves. We're here with the BMW Foundation in Berlin. And we're here with the heads of branches of our organization of entire Europe. So now what we're going to do is we're going to open the floor for questions here. I'm going to repeat the questions and Nat is going to answer them for a few minutes.
Do you think the donor-based concept of charity is outdated?
Sure, I don't know about the sound. We'll just repeat that. Okay, I'll just repeat it quickly. So I think the camera's here. That's why. So the question was from actually our head of the branch in Berlin, whether donor-based concepts of NGOs are actually outdated. Maybe there's a different model. Is that correct?
I don't think that it's outdated in the sense that I still think there's value in it. I still think there are organizations that should continue to raise finance via donations. Having said that, I think that probably too many organizations focus on that. Too many organizations do that as sort of the default option, and too many organizations do spend too much of their time trying to raise money. Some organizations invest 80-90% of their time and mental capacity in fundraising campaigns, where I think that that time could maybe be better spent focusing on how can we improve the programs. And so I do think that it's important for organizations to not assume that the only way to be financially viable is via donations, because that's incredibly time consuming. It's also very difficult to scale the organization, and it also just takes up a lot of time and effort. And so I do think the organizations that I most like personally are those that try to be financially sustainable in other ways, whether by generating revenue from services or generating revenue from sort of side projects. I've seen a lot of innovative business models over the years, and it's that innovation that I think we want to encourage, rather than having thousands upon thousands of charities targeting the same donors for what is a limited amount of money.
Okay, great. Then I would say, any other questions? Okay.
Can you advise us like 5 things that best describe a leader?
Okay, question was to ask 5 things that best describe a leader. This might be a tough one.
Sure. I'm not sure that I'll get to 5. One sort of analogy for leadership that I once heard, which is a bit cliche, but I think it's a good analogy, and that's sort of comparing leadership, and it sounds a bit strange, but to a sort of GPS navigator. And I think that, I mean, when you set out on a journey, sort of you're the one driving it, but it's the navigator that provides the directions. And I think similarly, or by analogy, I think leaders need to not be in the driver's seat. Leaders need to not do the driving. They need to sort of provide the guidance and the direction and facilitate other people. I think that's important. I think the other sort of way in which it's similar is that when you get lost, when you take a wrong turn, as will inevitably happen in any organization, things will go wrong, things will happen that are unplanned. I think what you need to be is sort of a calming influence. You need to sort of quickly sort of figure out a new route, a new navigation that'll still get you to your destination. It might be a different path, it might be a different route, it might take a bit longer, it might be cost a bit more money, but you need to be sort of the one to sort of chart that new path, and also one who is calm under pressure. It might be the taxi driver or the driver who starts getting annoyed and angry when they've sort of got lost, but I do think it's important to sort of be calm, to take things in your stride, but to keep working towards that same destination. So that's not 5 things about leadership, but it's a couple. So.
Okay, great. So, we'll ask for more questions. Okay, we've got 3 more. Should we get Timothy first?
What are the things that leadership of an NGO can learn from leadership of a for-profit organization?
Okay, quickly repeat it again. What can leaders of NGOs learn from leaders in for-profit organizations? Correct?
So I think one thing about for-profit organizations, obviously they have a very different mission, driven more by financial returns than social returns. But I think that in for-profit companies, there is a greater emphasis and a greater focus on sort of a few things. One is scaling. So often venture capitalists will invest in companies that have the potential to scale rapidly. I think we don't see that enough in the non-profit sector. Too often we have organizations that don't think of scaling from the beginning. And I think it's important to have ways in which you can magnify your social impact rather than just be content to sort of focus on a very small area. I think a second way in which for-profit companies are often different is that they're more aware of competition. And they're more aware of what other players in the market are doing. And I'm not saying that we want competition so much in the non-profit space. I think in many ways collaboration is the new competition. Collaboration is what gets people ahead. But I do think it's important for non-profit organizations to be aware of where their competitive advantage is, what they can offer that other organizations can't, where their advantage lies. And the way that you do that is being aware of what other organizations are doing and trying to be better than other organizations. And I think that it's often competition that drives improvement. So those are a few things that we see often in the for-profit space that I think it'd be good if we saw more of in the non-profit space.
Okay, perfect. I think then we'll take Martina next.
So 180 Degrees offers an international network. Do you think that a profit organization can use this international network, or they are more dedicated on the local area? So which is the scale, geographically speaking, of no-profit organization?
I'm not sure I understood it 100%. You mean how 100?
I mean how a non-profit organization can use this feature of 180 degrees of being international? Is a non-profit organization able to use this kind of strength or not? Is it more clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
So certainly so the question is around scaling, and 180 Degrees has grown quite rapidly. We started in Sydney, then we had a branch in Mexico and Sweden. And from those 3 branches, really basically in the past 3 or 4 years, we've gone from 3 branches to 43. And the question is, how can other organizations learn from 180 Degrees' experience around sort of scaling and achieving greater social impact? I think it's important to recognize that there are different ways of scaling that suit different organizations. So 180 Degrees has very much worked through universities. And we have branches at different universities all around the world. And in some ways, 180 Degrees is almost a social franchise. We're a network of different university-based consultancies, and we support each other and help each other as we try to have a social impact. There are other types of organizations, particularly tech-based or software-based social enterprises, that rather than scaling through sort of franchises, might scale more quickly from sort of one location. And technology and software does enable very rapid scaling. One of my favorite non-profit organizations is actually Wikipedia. And that might surprise some people. But what I like about it is, one, it very much was innovative. It turned on its head the idea of how can we actually have accurate knowledge. It changed the mindset from let's ask the one expert in the field to let's actually ask the crowd. Let's ask a lot of people. Let's make the process dynamic rather than static. And with a staff of only 20 or 30 people, they reach about 600 million people each day. And so that's an organization that has been able to come up with an innovative idea and use technology to reach a very large audience. And that method of scaling is obviously vastly different to 180 Degrees. But I do think that it's important to think about how we can scale, what are the avenues for scaling, how will this growth happen, will it be an organic process, can we piggyback on other trends or other organizations, can we partner with other organizations to be able to move into new geographic markets. So the method of scale won't be the same for every organization, but as I said before, I think it's important that organizations have that in their mind, and when organizations do set up systems and processes, they set it up such that the organizations can scale in the future.
Okay, great. I think we're going to take 2 more questions. Next one was Havish.
Do you think that the leaders of big firms nowadays spin CSR and social activity for marketing and media benefits?
I think that certainly has been the case in the past. So what we've seen is very much a trend. So for a long time, we had corporate social responsibility, and businesses very much saw that as sort of an add-on to their business. You might have an organization that made a certain amount of profit, and then as part of their corporate social responsibility, they donated 5% or 10% of that to a particular charity or a particular cause. I think what we're seeing is actually a trend away from that. And what we're seeing is more and more businesses recognize that social impact isn't something that is just on the side, isn't something that's an add-on to the business or a tack onto the business. Social impact is very much something that needs to be core to the business. And importantly, achieving a social impact doesn't need to come at the expense of achieving financial returns. And one of the things that we focus on a lot within 180 Degrees is how can we have win-win situations. And I think I want to encourage businesses to also look for those situations where actually by being socially conscious or environmentally sustainable, they can actually improve their bottom line. So, for example, if a company reduced their packaging, it might lower their cost, but at the same time help the environment. That's just one of many examples I could give you of where social and financial returns are aligned rather than working against each other. So I think it's a trend that I'm happy about. In some ways, social entrepreneurship succeeds if we no longer refer to social entrepreneurship as social entrepreneurship, if it's just entrepreneurship. And if we see achieving a social impact as very core and very integral and very important to any business, regardless of what their financial mission might be.
Okay, great. Then we'll take the last question.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, like, a lot of universities are trying to teach leadership skills, but can you really learn that?
I think we'll repeat this one. Basically, because universities teach leadership, whether it's even teachable, right?
So is leadership teachable? One question I'm also asked that's similar to that is, can you teach entrepreneurship? I think in both of those cases, there's certainly elements that you can learn from talking in a classroom, from reading books, etc. Because what that enables is you can learn from other people's experiences. If you read 50 people's life stories and lessons that they've learned, then what it does enable you to do is to have a greater wealth of experience than what you've personally experienced. Having said that, I don't think there's any substitute for personal experience. And I think certainly the most important lessons that I've learned in my life have been from getting my hands dirty, trying things, failing, trying again, learning along the way. And I do think that we do need that hands-on experience. And in some ways, that's what I like about 180 Degrees. We're getting university students, and we're not only giving them a theoretical education, we're actually getting them doing practical, tangible work. We're getting them helping real organizations solve real problems. And that's something that is somewhat lacking at many universities and lacking in general in the education sector. It's that hands-on work experience that actually is meaningful. Because what we provide university students with is the opportunity to make a difference, the opportunity to get professional training and mentoring, the opportunity to get work experience at the same time. So we're sort of hitting three birds with one stone. And I think that it's that hands-on experience of leading, of making mistakes, of learning from that, of not making those same mistakes again, that is incredibly valuable. And it's that sort of thing that you can't learn from a textbook.
Okay, great. Well, unfortunately, we're not going to take any more questions just for right now. First of all, thank you so much, Nat. This is not only going to be a live hangout, but we're going to publish it to YouTube. So if you by any chance stumble on this on YouTube and you got inspired and you liked it, you can go to, if you're a student or a socially conscious organization, you can go to 180dc.org and find out what we do. So then thank you, Nat. And
thank you.
Then also thank you to the audience.